There we are. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me turn the script off. I have 5:30 Pacific time. Welcome. Today is the first session of the Pacific Division Feeding Capacity Building series. It's a mouthful. I recognize many of your names from our past series, the Sheltering Capacity Building series. I'm very glad that we're putting up this Pacific Division Feeding Capacity Building series that is presented by the Division Feeding leadership. My name is Yi Wei, and I will be your host and moderator throughout this series. Several things for housekeeping. This meeting will be recorded. It will be sent out within a week with the slides. All the recording will be posted on YouTube. You can search for the Red Cross Pacific Division on YouTube. And if you attended our past seasons for the Sheltering Capacity Building series, they are also on the YouTube already, so you can make a reference to that. And I know the sheltering group is also trying to have a capacity building series after our series. So if you can kindly respond to the survey that Alan sent out the other day, that will greatly appreciate that. I put down that your camera and microphones have been disabled, but for some odd reason for this new Teams, the new version, I don't seem to be able to disable the camera and the microphone. So I kindly ask you to turn off your camera, turn off your microphone. We currently have 214 people or 215 people present. We might get more. Turning off your camera and mic will help us to preserve the bandwidth. And if you can also help me, if you're seeing other people start coming off mute, if you can also help me to mute other people as well. And I'll see what I can do for the next session. I'm not sure how I couldn't turn off the, I couldn't disable the mic and camera. You're welcome to put all your chat, put your questions into the chat. We will answer in the chat as well. And towards the end, we'll open the floor up so you can ask questions directly to us as well. Remember to log in your hours on Volunteer Connection. We will not be able to record your hours because we have a fast group across the division or probably across the nation as well. So remember to log in your hours in Volunteer Connection. I saw a question earlier that do we get certificate for this meeting? Unfortunately, we are not giving out certificates and we're not giving out EDGE credits because this is not an EDGE course. Your region might do something different. We'll leave to the region as well. Several things before we pass it to our presenters today. I want to touch a little bit on what is the Pacific Division and what geographic areas we cover. So we have 10 regions. We have Alaska, California Gold Country region, CGCR, Cascades region, Central California region, we also call them CCR, Idaho and Montana region, we have the Los Angeles region, we have Northern California Coastal region, NCCR, we also have Northwest region, Pacific Islands region, Southern California region. I encourage you all to type your name in the chat. Tell us which region you're from or which state you're from so we can welcome each other and say hi to each other. Several people I know that joined early at 4:30 or 3:30 because we do have a lot of geographic areas that we cover as the Pacific Division. We have the state of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, California, Hawaii, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. So the wildfires that we had for Lahaina was part of the Pacific Division. And last year when we had the Typhoon Mawar was also part of our Pacific Division. So Pacific Division has a lot of territories and we have different time zones. So remind yourself next time that the 5:30 p.m. is Pacific time. And I know as we go into daylight saving times, some regions, some states don't observe the timeline difference. So you might want to watch what the actual timeline is. And with that, I am going to turn to Mary and Kay. Mary is our Pacific Division feeding lead, and Kay is our Pacific Division mass care lead. And Mary, Kay, it's all yours.
Yue, I am still not seeing Mary Prather on the call. I don't think she is on.
Would you like to cover hers?
I think I'm going to have to.
We're going to adapt.
Yes. Everybody, my name is Kay Ashton, and I am from the Alaska region. I am the mass care lead for both my region and for the PAC. So everybody is going to have to bear with us because Mary wasn't able to get on the call somehow. She is down somewhere south, very south, and I am very north. So let's go ahead. This is her presentation, so I'm going to do with it what I can. Tonight, we're going to be hearing a lot about the four-letter F word. Next. Food. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the feeding program is right now. Next. Okay, the goals of this series. The whole series is helping volunteers understand and build their capacity and confidence so that you can undertake various feeding roles in the PAC division and in other divisions throughout the nation and territories. Go ahead. A long time ago, probably about 18 months, there was a comment made by leadership that basically feeding was going away. It is not going away. That was just a statement making sheltering the most important thing in mass care. But unfortunately, everybody took it the wrong way and everybody thought, oh my goodness, we're not going to do feeding anymore. I think the simplest thing is to realize that if we have clients, then they have to be fed. So again, feeding is here. It needs to be, we need to make it stronger. But I think that we can do that. Next. The information in EDGE, I don't know if anybody's noticed it, but it's extremely old. In the last 3 years, feeding has changed very much, just like everything else has. With COVID and with our downturn in volunteers, it's changed a lot. And the way we do it in the Pacific is very different than the way that we used to do things in, say, hurricanes. So next. We do know we are getting new training out. We don't know when, but this is to fill that gap. So this is about.
I'm here.
Mary.
I'm having internet issues. I'm sorry.
No problem. Please take over.
Well, hello everyone. I apologize for being late. I am here in Costa Rica and we don't have the best internet. And when we do have internet, sometimes it's affected by the weather. So I apologize for having difficulty getting in tonight. So I assume Kay's already gone through the first few slides. So I'm just going to pick up here and really say that it's really a very, very large opportunity. We have actions that happen in blue skies as well as gray skies. We have different types of feeding. We're going to talk about how we order food and pay for food, talk about food safety, working in the field kitchen versus just having food delivered to the shelter, being a feeding supervisor, and then, of course, all of the forms and paperwork that are involved in feeding. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, there's a variety of feeding methods, and we're not going to go into all of them tonight, but we certainly want people to be aware that there is a lot of different ways that we can feed our clients. We do, some of the methods are, of course, you can see right there, we use partners for feeding. We have several national contracts that we use. We have local vendors that we use. And occasionally we do have field kitchens, but one of the reasons we've included field kitchens in this series is that while we don't do a lot of those in the Pacific Division, a lot of Pacific Division volunteers go to other areas where there are field kitchens. And it's important that people understand how those operate and can really function with a lot of confidence in those situations. So as well as talking about the different methods of feeding, there's a whole lot of roles that revolve around feeding. There's the service associate, of course, and a lot of times that can be both a feeding SA or even a shelter SA that then is involved in feeding. And remember, we feed multiple times a day. We're talking breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack time. So there's always activities happening around feeding. I know some people think, oh, well, you just order the food and it gets delivered, but there's really a lot more involved. And it's really quite exciting because it gives you an opportunity to interact with our clients multiple times a day. So some of the roles that you can see there, you could work your way up to a feeding manager, serving from an IRF. So where you drive out into the community where the community's been impacted by some type of disaster and they can't necessarily get to a kitchen, a community kitchen, or to the shelter, we will take the food to them. And so serving from an IRF or driving an IRF, we'll talk a little bit about that. All of this will be discussed in the series, but tonight we're just giving you a brief overview. Next slide. So here's what we talked a little bit on the last slide. What's different in the Pacific Division? I know we have Red Cross standards and Red Cross protocols, but sometimes things happen a little differently out west here. And let me give you some examples of what causes us to be a little different. First of all, we have lots of what we call no notice events. Let me give you an example. Earthquake. Okay, we don't have really a good earthquake warning system. And all of you from California, don't be chuckling. That would be compared to a noticed event like a hurricane and where we know the path of the hurricane is coming. So there's a real difference there in terms of getting prepared, if you will. Okay, I see the California people laughing now. It's a real different way to get prepared for this disaster and being able to feed in this disaster. Because when you know the hurricane is coming up the coast of Florida and it's going to cut right across the panhandle or whatever, then you can situate yourself, get your food vendors ready, get your partners ready, get your kitchens ready, because you know it's coming. Not so much with some of the other ones. Additionally, you could say that the wildfires that we experience out west, and unfortunately, I know Texas has experienced quite a bit of this recently. Wildfires don't necessarily have a certain path of destruction. It's driven by winds, and winds can take fire sparks a long distance and start another fire a mile, 2 mile, 5 miles away. So the known path of destruction versus an unpredictable path keeps us from necessarily having the ability to plan and be ready and take our time and get organized and have all of our feeding vendors lined up, because we don't know which direction the fire might go or which direction any disaster might happen. Also, when you talk about, I'm going to skip down rural and urban areas. Of course, there are some rural areas in other parts of the country, but the Pacific Division and certainly Pacific Northwest is very, very rural in a lot of areas. And so that makes for what we call tiny shelters out here. So shelters of 30 people or less, versus when you have an event that happens like a hurricane or tornado, and it rips through a particular pattern in city, you have a whole lot of people usually in the shelter. So you have large shelters versus small shelters. And again, we're going to talk a lot about this individually in different sessions, but tonight's just an overview. Okay, the next slide. Thank you. So here's something that many of you have probably heard about recently. I know I've heard Brad and Pippa talk about it a lot, and that is moving from what they call transactional versus transformational. And to best describe that in a feeding sense, a transaction with feed, you order your food, you slap down your money, and you get your food. That's a transaction. So what we're trying to do in feeding and in our shelter to align ourselves with the new philosophy is really look at what makes feeding transformational. I personally believe feeding brings people together. It is, the heart and soul usually of the home. If you really want to understand someone, go have a meal at their house, share in their culture and their food. So the way we in the Red Cross can move from a transaction of here's your food, they're all identical, they're all in individually packaged meals, styrofoam containers, and they're set on a table, and the clients just file through the line, and there's no volunteer interaction. What we hope to do and what we like to see happening is that meals meet the client needs. And we're going to talk extensively about special diets, food that looks pleasing to the eye, food that's served at appropriate temperatures. There's nothing worse than having a hot meal that comes in cold. Cold mashed potatoes, not my favorite. We're talking about meals that are served or handed to the clients. So actually giving you a chance to say hi, how you doing? How's it going today? They're delivered with some kind of a greeting and a smile as opposed to just put on the table and let people file through and take them. And also at a time and a place where you can engage with the client and talk to them and share with them and comfort them in some cases. So it's really our effort in feeding to move along with all of the Red Cross from this feeling of we're here to transact with the client, get them what they need and get them on their way, to really helping them, not just survive this trauma, but really grow from it. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's not my quote. It's a quote from a famous chef, and I can't remember the name at the moment. But when people are fed, futures are nourished. Now, I know the slide at the beginning says you can't do sheltering without feeding. You just can't. You cannot expect people to come and not have food and water along with their shelter. So my philosophy is, if I want people to grow in the future, then I need to provide not just good nourishing food, but in an environment that they feel safe and comfortable and they feel welcome. So I like to use this a lot. I mean, I nourish generations. I just don't feed people. So I hope you can join us in the whole feeding series. I know I sound a little passionate about it, and I guess I am, but I can tell you the feeding activity is awesome. Once you get involved, you can be as busy as you want, because there's tons of activities in Blue Skies. And you can be busy doing gray skies. You can actually be one of the feeders, be one of the shelter feeders. You can do non-congregate sheltering. You can be driving a nerve. We've got all kinds of things, and we're really excited about this series and share with you how we do all of that, because it is really, really exciting.
Mary,
Next
could
slide.
you share with
Yes.
us what is blue sky and what is gray sky for us?
Of course, and thank you for bringing that up. So in blue skies really is the time when we're not running a disaster. It's the preparation time in the Red Cross wheel of how we prepare for any kind of disaster before we're actually responding. Gray skies is actually the response that we are doing. So we're in gray skies in Texas right now with the wildfires that are going on there. So there's opportunities if you don't want to be involved in the disaster, and you don't want to go to different DROs around the country. There's still a lot of opportunities in what the rest of the year when we call blue skies. That's all about building relationships with your feeding vendors and building relationships with your communities, with your food banks, because they're all there to help you. They all want to do the same thing with your feeding partners, both the national feeding partners that are active in your area, as well as your local feeding partners. So blue skies, kind of when things are somewhat calm, and gray skies when they're not.
Thank you, Mary. I love it.
We're going to talk about relationships right now. One of the things that has changed, I think, is that now we're working more as teams across all the groups. We have to admit that MassCare requests more items from the rest of the groups than anyone else does. Therefore, we have to understand them. And this is kind of a quote that I am using across the MassCare to try to get people to understand we need to understand other people. MassCare success with our clients depends on the relationship we have with all our other groups and the external resources that we are using. Next. Who do we work with internally? Well, this list could go on forever, but I just wanted to highlight some of the main groups that we work with. We work internally with logistics. We work with staff services, individual disaster services, external relations, information and planning, and finance, just to name a few, and there's examples for each one of them. Without them, we couldn't do our job. And it's not just important to know what we need from them, but also what do they need from us? Next. Who do we work with externally? Mary touched on this. We do work with local restaurants and caterers in the Pacific. We work with VOADs. We work with national partners such as the Southern Baptist and the Salvation Army, and local nonprofits such as food banks. This is where most of our work takes place in our blue skies. Paperwork's never fun, but it's critical to have. So going and meeting with these people and coming up with agreements, what can they offer us and what do they need from us? It's a two-way street. Next.
Kate, before we move on, we have a question. What is VOADS?
VOAD is a group, and if somebody can come up with the acronym and exactly what it means, please put it in the chat. It is basically your local group of volunteers from different volunteer agencies. So let's say that it can have tribal, it can have nonprofits, it can have governments in it. It has a lot of different agencies who can handle different aspects of a disaster. So you might have, I know up here in our VOAD, we have Salvation Army, we have the Red Cross, we have Animal Care and Control, and just we have numerous food banks. We have a lot of different groups. Did somebody put it in chat what it means?
Yes,
Yes.
VOADS is the National Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. It's a
Thank
coalition.
you. Thank you. I must admit, I'm too comfortable with acronyms. So in steady state, your blue skies, basically start talking and definitely listening. What is it you need and what is it that they need? Attend other Red Cross meetings other than feeding. I go to a lot of logistics meetings and find out what they need. Talking to sheltering, what's going right, what's going wrong, what do they see that's good, and what do they see that needs to be improved? Draw up agreements with other organizations or restaurants, attend the VOAD meetings, and know what is available. Ask questions, tons of questions, and mostly plan ahead. This makes, when you go into a disaster, you go into gray skies. If you've done your homework in blue skies, it can make it really so much better, and the clients get so much better care. Next.
Thank you, Kate. And we have one question before we move on to the next slide.
Of course.
How do we find a list of partners in our area for Blue Skies for Steady State?
Yeah, I would start with your local government. I think that that's a great place to start. Talk to your other groups. What partners do they use? You can just look up who's the food bank, who's doing these types of things. You're going to have to do a lot of footwork, especially for restaurants. This is one of the harder things I think that we take on in the PAC is trying to order food from restaurants. So that's not easy. Not all restaurants are set up. There's a list of specifications that we have to follow, such as nutrition and special needs for foods. So again, there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of pounding the pavement. You can also go
Gotta
to
get
your
in the,
next region
gotta get in
over.
the email.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
You can also go to your next region over, your next territory or chapter over. Ask who they're using and how did they get their plan set up. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely, Kay. And
All
we
right.
have lots of good comments in the chat as well. We mentioned county emergency managers, the disaster program managers. They may have local relationships as well. The county emergency operations centers, the CEOs of our group or the executive directors of the local chapters. People mentioned that we have churches, we have other local assistance centers that we can, we can reach out for assistance as well.
Great. This is a great group. So anyway, this is really the most important thing is building those relationships now so we can build the relationships when they're needed most. And they are definitely needed in feeding, I think. And I've been in feeding now since Katrina. I worked my way up through feeding. I just think it is the most wonderful area group to be in. It is, you truly get to see a transition in someone's face when you hand them a warm meal. So I'm going to give it back to Mary for a second, and she's going to lead us in the next section.
Well, thanks, Kate. Really, the next section is a Q&A of what are your questions now? And you can either raise your hand, just come off mute, or put it in the chat if you want. But we'd like to know, first of all, do you have any questions about what we originally talked about? And then once we get your questions answered, now that you know where we're kind of headed, what is it you want more information about? We have 9 different series outlined, if you will, 9 different sessions, all covering the topics that we did an overview on. But we want to make sure that we get your input and hear what it is that you really need to know more about in order to feel confident about going in and being a feeding SA or feeding supervisor. You know, one of the things that I don't have on a slide, and I don't know if it was mentioned or not, but feeding is the largest cost that the Red Cross incurs in any disaster. If you think about it, you know, a lot of our shelters are with community partners. Yes, on disasters, we have rental cars and things like that. But when you're feeding people, it can be quite expensive. So we need to really make sure we've done our homework. We've got good quality nutritional food ready on board to feed our clients. So I'm really excited about it. I hope you guys are, and I'd love to hear what you have to ask.
Mary, thank you. We'll give people some time to type the question in the chat or come off mute or raise their hand. While we're giving them time, I saw a question earlier I think is really relevant to anything in mass care or sheltering or feeding, is that if I want to support, if I'm a brand new volunteer, I want to support, I saw the fire in Lahaina, or I saw the wildfires currently going on in Texas. How can I support? Whom do I reach out to? And how do I put myself, say, hey, I want to help?
So, Kay, do you want to take that?
I can. The most important thing is that we are 90% volunteer led. And so we have a very small staff. So as volunteers, we have to take the initial steps in reaching out to the staff and letting them know what we need. I would definitely reach out to your workforce engagement person. And if you don't know who that is, you could go to your disaster program manager. You could go to any of the staff and find out who the workforce engagement person is. Let them know that you are willing to deploy and you want to deploy. The other way of doing it is on Volunteer Connection. There is an area under disaster services in my profile that says availability. Definitely fill that out. When are you available to deploy? Because that is used by the deployment team to pull up names who could possibly go. It's not a hard, fast commitment. So, you know, it may be in that time you're not available. So when somebody calls you, you get to say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. But it is definitely your best guess on when you are going to be available.
Thank you so much, Kate. So reach out to your disaster workforce engagement team and they will help you. I do see a hand raised. Let's go through the questions in the chat first and we'll get to the hand raised. We have a question from Roxanne is, what is the best way shelter volunteers can support for the feeding mission?
I'll take that, Mary. I think that the sheltering team and the feeding team are beginning to really reach out and join each other. They know that we both serve an incredibly important part of the client care. I know that we are working now in sheltering to kind of say, wait a second, what do we need in feeding? And they've talked about we need more food safety and things like that. So I think it is very, very, we're beginning to be kind of one unit, which is really great. I would find out who is your territorial feeding coordinator. Again, you can go to your disaster program manager or your regional sheltering person and talk to them about getting involved. Go to their meetings, find out when their meetings are. So again, there's lots of different ways. I really believe that these, you know, all of us are concerned about the client and their best care. And so it's really nice to talk to sheltering people, and they love us too.
And let me just say, let me add to Kay's. So I believe there's only 2 or 3 additional classes for a shelter SA to get their feeding their feeding SA. But if you didn't want to do those couple of online classes, probably the most important thing would be to take a food safety class. And there is one in Edge that you could take, or the states and counties also run food safety classes. While we will be talking about food safety later in session 3, which, by the way, I will be back in California and hopefully won't have internet issues. We will be talking about how to handle safe food or handle food safely. We won't be going into detail about all of the microbes and all of the diseases that can be transmitted through food, but that's interesting, and that is included in the course in Edge. So for the person who asked that question, the quickest thing to do is get your feeding gap and or take a food safety handling class.
Thank you, Mary and Kay. And I encourage you all to check your volunteer connection profile to see if you do have a feeding gap. GAP stands for group, activity, and position. The group will be mass care. The activity will be feeding, and the position will either be service associates, supervisor, or managers. So I encourage you at the end of this session, if you don't have a feeding gap yet, I encourage you to take the classes and get that gap. And also that Kay mentioned that, by attending meetings and classes and whatnot, I do want to mention that NHQ plus National Headquarters puts out a Mass Care webinar every month. That is the third Thursday of the month. That is 2 o'clock to 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, that I also encourage you all to join. Okay, so let's see the next question. Kay and Mary, our next question is, what post-COVID procedures have we kept to reduce spread of illness?
Well,
Mary, why don't you take that?
I will start with that. Food safety happens to be one of my passions. And while the Red Cross has not required things like masks, we still have the same food safety issues that we've always had. Must wear disposable gloves, must wear hair nets or hats, or hair, if you have a beard, a beard net. Must wear a disposable apron. I mean, I know we have lots of fun aprons around and they're cloth, but let me tell you, there's nothing worse than having a stained apron and serving food to a client. So we always use the disposable aprons. In terms of additional COVID things that we had put in place, like set down and step back, we don't have that requirement from the Red Cross. But of course, when you're in a large shelter and you're serving lots of people, it's really up to you to keep a comfortable space between you and the clients. If you're serving off a line, there needs to be a sneeze guard of some kind. If it's like a cafeteria line, or if it's individually packaged meals, then you can just hand it to them. You don't have to set it down and step back. And there was one other thing I was going to say. Oh, so two things. First of all, we've always, during COVID, we said no one can get their own snacks and water. And honestly, no one should ever pick up their own water out of a cooler of ice water. Water is the easiest way to spread bacteria. And quite frankly, ice water, even if it's really, really hot outside, is not as hydrating as room temperature water. I know that sounds weird. However, let me just quickly explain that because you're taking in ice water, it takes energy in your body to raise the temperature of that water to a temperature that your cells can absorb it. So you're creating more energy, and it's actually not as nourishing or as hydrating as it could be. So, but I know room temperature water isn't great. Everyone doesn't like that. So we do still put water on ice, but we cannot have people putting their hands in the ice and taking out. The best practice is set the water far enough apart on a table so that someone can pick it up without touching a lot of different ones. And the same for your snacks. We don't. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
No, I'm done.
Yeah, I think COVID is not the only disease that we're looking at with food. We're looking at a lot of different pathogens. I think the water is how norovirus spreads so easily in a shelter. So I think taking these precautions are extremely important across the board.
And I can tell you in the Gold Country region, this is just an example, you know, we still put hand sanitizer out on the cafeteria line and, you know, ask people to sanitize their hands before they come through. So while the quote unquote COVID requirements were eliminated, those of us in feeding take food safety and healthy food handling very seriously. And we do a lot of different we've kept a lot of those precautions.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kay. Our next question is, where can we learn more about logistics or serving from emergency response vehicle IRV? Or how can we learn more about feeding in general? Where should we go?
Well, I'm excited someone asked that question because we are going to have a whole session on feeding from the IRVs and what's required and what there's not only feeding from the IRV, but there's driving the IRV and there's organizing the IRV routes. So there will be more information coming in the series. And what was the other part of the question, Yue?
The other part is, in general, how do they get the gap, and what trainings? How do they know how to support logistics or learn more about other functions?
So to get the gap, there are a certain number of classes that are, I believe, for the essay, all online in Edge. And so you would just take those classes. You would work with your workforce engagement person to make sure you've taken all the classes required, and then add that gap. Ask that gap be added to your group activity gap, be added to your profile. Kay, do you want to add anything?
No, I think the same is true with getting your IRV certification. Once there's two certifications you can get with an IRV, and that's driving it locally, such as the DAT teams. I think it's within 50 miles. And then there is being able to drive it nationally. To drive it nationally, you need a feeding gap, and you just take a driving course in doing the IRV. So you find out how to run it and take care of it. And then you go ahead and take a driving test at the end. But there's more on that to come.
Thank you so much, Kay. So we have multiple people put in the chat that to get the IRV driver certificate, the specialty track, there's a course and there's the link that you need to take and to pass the driving test. To know more about other gaps or other activities and what required courses or for feeding gaps, there's a link as well that is in the chat, which when I send out the follow-up email, I will also include the training requirements link so we can find out more about that. We have a question that we get asked a lot for leadership. You know, when leadership says, okay, order meals. And the first question we always say is, how much is the budget? So we have a question is, how do we find out the budget and what is the target cost per meal? You know, we talked about transactional services versus transformation services. Do we really have a budget for every single operation and it's a set amount?
Well, we have budgets.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have budgets.
Yeah, but that depends on where we are, the cost of food, those kinds of things. We always try to protect the donor dollar, but we try to give the best nutrition possible. There are going to be new guidelines coming out, so I'm not going to try to give a number because we don't know quite yet. But those numbers are set in your budget in the DR. So you would go to your, I'm going to blow it, SDT, which is your standard plan. Oh God, somebody help me. What does it stand for?
SDP, Service Delivery Plan.
Thank you. I'm going to have to go back and look at my acronyms. But anyway, that is all determined beforehand. But again, there are new procedures and policies coming out.
Let me give a little example. The cost of meals in Manhattan, in Long Island with Hurricane Sandy. Let me be more general. The cost of meals in New York are quite different than the cost of meals in Ohio or the rural area of Northern California. So there can be no set cost per meal,
Right.
national or even regional. But what Kay identified is for every DR, there will be a budget. So it's working with your supervisors, whether it's the feeding manager at headquarters or the mass care chief, to say, look, meals here, because we're so rural and we only have X, Y, and Z number of food vendors or providers, is going to cost us this per meal. And then that gets incorporated in the budget. I'll tell you, and I know Lauren Myers will back me up on this, it is more important that we serve nutritional, high quality food than we worry about, it has to be this amount.
Yeah.
We're here to take care of our clients. Yes.
One of the most important things too is to realize that if the region that you are in has done their work in Blue Skies, they've already established agreements with these different vendors for the price of food, and they know what the price is for their local area. So again, if we do our Blue Sky work, the people who come in and work a disaster, it makes it much easier for them.
And we're going to talk a lot about that in I think session 3. So for those who asked that question, stay tuned. There's more info to come.
Thank you so much, Mary and Kay. I know we have 13 more minutes remaining and we do have a lot of questions. Before we go on to further questions, I do want to encourage everyone to join the next session that we're going to talk about how to be a great feeding essay. I love the topic because when we did the sheltering, we said how to be a great shelter essay. And now we're going to talk about feeding. And like we mentioned multiple times and multiple people mentioned in the chat is food is the comfort. It brings us comfort, really calms our nervous system when we're in a stressful environment, especially in disasters. So before I go to the chat question, I do see a hand raised for a very long time from unknown user. Do you mind to come off mute and share with us your questions?
Okay, hi, this is Nancy, and I think the unknown is myself, so I'm going to speak. But I did notice I tried to enter, I have two issues. One is completely irrelevant to feeding, but when I tried to enter my question in chat, it said that I'm not a member of the chat. So do you have to be using your Red Cross email in order to be able to enter questions into chat, or even to see what is being entered into chat?
That is such a great question. And I want to share with everyone that most of the time, the Red Cross email address usually is the most beneficial way or the most convenient way that for you to view chats, for you to view things. When you're a guest or when you're an unknown user that it didn't register, you're still able to access the chat function. But sometimes when the meeting ends, when we leave the meeting, close the meeting, sometimes the system kicks you out. So I do suggest you to get a Red Cross email address if you're really active in the disaster responses. I do encourage you to get that. But you can,
yes, and I do have one, but for whatever reason, this came to my personal email.
Yeah, so it'll be beneficial. But either way, you can always come off mute like you're doing now, or you can see sometimes when after you log off, then come back on again, sometimes it does give you the chat options. Teams, I think recently it's a little weird on my end as well, between this new version versus the classic version. I think we're having I personally have some glitches. And there's always a dialing option as well. We have multiple people asking if there's a dialing option, if they don't want to use Teams. Yes, there's a dialing option. On the link that I sent out towards the bottom, it says call in audio only. You can see that. And if you're calling in, that if you're not able to see the slides, I will be sending out the slides afterwards, and it will be posted on YouTube with the link that I'm sending out.
Okay, so let me get to my feeding question real quick. I've
Okay.
heard that National has developed MOUs with certain large-scale organizations such as the Salvation Army and Southern Baptist. Now, is this true? And if that is true, then does that mean that we do not locally need to develop our own MOUs with them?
Oh, no, you definitely need to you need to have a conversation with them.
Right.
A lot of them, just like we don't know exactly a lot of times what's going on with National, a lot of times they don't either. So I would go and talk to them and say, what is your understanding of our agreement? If they say we don't have an agreement, then I would definitely move that up the chain and maybe talk to your DPM or talk to someone in feeding. But you still need to talk to them. You still need to know how much time it takes them to ramp up. How many people can they serve? Those kinds of questions are still extremely important
Okay, well,
for you to know.
we've had those conversations, but we're kind of at this point where does National's MOU take precedence? And I would think that even if we developed our own MOU, it's still going to have to be patterned under any qualifications or restrictions that are within the National MOU. So do
This
we
is
need
true.
to- So do
Yes.
we need to have access to that National MOU and an understanding of who
Wow.
National has MOUs with?
That's a good one.
Well,
Go ahead, Mary.
the MOUs are in OneSource, and
Oh, they
you
are,
know,
okay.
the national ones, and there is a set price that National has negotiated with these organizations. Now, I do know personally that sometimes that has been altered slightly because of issues locally, but generally speaking, those are set. The organizations can't come to you in Southern California and say, oh, we're going to have to charge this amount. No, that agreement is already in place nationally.
Right.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll go then and do some research in OneSource.
And all of those organizations have regional CEOs or executives, and we will be talking about that in one of the presentations when we're talking about the partner feedings.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we wanted to reach out to you and have you give us questions and what do you want to see more of is so that the people coming up can adjust their presentations to make sure that we address as much as possible.
Thank
I'd
you,
like to-
Kay.
I'd like to interject for a minute, please. My name's
Yeah.
Ron. My name's Ron Matthew, and I'm a feeding coordinator in San Diego. And I have a lot of experience and ideas about just the things you're talking about. And we just went through a 38-day flooding disaster where we fed 420 people a day. So there's a lot of tricks and things that you can do out there. And just to be brief, if one of you would like to give me a call, I can give you some notes on things, and I'll be happy to help. Because I know I can help, and we do a lot of things with the local franchises, and when they're too small to take care of 140 people for a thing, then we go to the PR department like McDonald's, and they source out the locals for the food. That's just one of the ideas that we do.
Ron,
So-
this is Mary, the Pacific Division feeding lead. I will be happy
Hi.
to reach out to you after this meeting.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't want to stop this meeting, but I have a lot of information I can help with, I believe.
Right, thanks.
Thank you. I know we only have 6 minutes left, and I like to, one of the good questions that I saw here was that the purpose of us for doing this feeding series is really to provide mentorship and to provide this capacity building to our team members. And one of the question is, how do we get this one-on-one mentorship? And how do we know, feeding is a really big topic, same as sheltering, same as anything mass cure, other functions. How do we build this one-on-one relationship in the mentorship program?
The one-on-one.
Go ahead,
ahead,
Mary.
Kate. Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. The one-on-one between sheltering and feeding, or between having like a job shadowing experience?
I think it's both. It's both for, for the steady state, that how do you have this mentorship, and also during operational state when you're going onto a disaster relief operation, how do you have a phone a friend? Or sometimes when you have a hectic disaster is always crazy, and it's rapidly growing, escalating. How do you find that mentorship that particular time when you're so new to the job, to have someone else to mentor you the same time that they're really busy doing their things, or you're also busy, both steady states and operational states?
Go ahead, Miss Kay.
I think that Yue just answered part of it. I think that taking the classes is always the start, but it's not the finish. Being involved in your territory, your chapter, is really how you get information. I think, some of us were thrown in the deep end and deployed right away. Not the best way to learn, but you can always find out who's been doing feeding for a little while in your territory chapter, and then go ahead and talk to them. Most of us are very willing, just like Ron did, to offer our expertise and our experiences with other people, because we are so passionate about feeding and sheltering. I think that, talking to people, being able to take classes, to make sure that if there's a tabletop, you go and experience that. Listening to these sessions, by the end of these 9 sessions or 10 sessions, you're going to know a lot more than you did, because we did a general one today. The ones that we're going to be doing in the future will be very specific and very detailed. As far as a mentoring on a job, if you can't get a mentor, some of the upper positions do have mentoring available to them, but grab somebody. You'll be able to tell in a kitchen, you'll be able to tell who's been around for a while. Go up to them, ask them if you can follow. Ask for things that you need. Go to your supervisor and say, hey, I know that Joe has been around feeding for a long time. I'd like to follow him around for a day or so. Would that be possible? So again, there's a lot of things that are available, but you really need to speak up for yourself and ask for them.
Thank you so much, Kay. And I see some great tips on the chat as well, that reach out to your local team volunteers, reach out to your supervisors during an operation, reach out to the disaster program managers or disaster program specialists. I saw several people ask, what is DPM? DPM is disaster program manager, and DPX, the X stands for managers and specialists. So it's the paid staff counterpart that you're able to reach out to. Same thing with Red Cross email address, reach out to them. They'll be more than happy to help. I know at one point on this meeting earlier that I saw we had over 280 people on this call, and some of them, they're paid staff as well. So you're more than welcome to reach out to them. And another tip is that anyone on this meeting, the reason earlier that I asked you to put your name down, regions down, and say hi to each other, is that the more that you attend those meetings, you start to recognize those names. And then when we get onto deployment, when you actually deploy outside of the region or the state, you do see familiar names, and they're really your phone a friend. Anyone that is a presenter in our series, you're more than welcome to email us, email all the presenters. And I'm sure that everyone is more than happy to help you as well, besides your local regions.
When you send when you send the information out, please do send Mary's and my contact.
Yes,
I will say that there's a set there are set standard of positions in territories and regions. You have your local coordinators, so you'll have a feeding coordinator. There are local teams, feeding teams, local coordinator, and then finally there's a regional lead. So you can get involved at almost any level. If you don't know who it is, your workforce engagement person will be able to give you that name and contact information.
Thank you, Kay. So in the follow-up email, I will also include your disaster workforce engagement contact as well. I will go ahead and pile up all the resources list so that we can share with you. I know that it is 6:30 Pacific time already, and we would like to conclude this session. I know we still
Anyway.
have more topics to cover. Yes, Mary.
I know. Real quickly, I just want
Yes.
people to know that we will go back through the questions. We will make sure they get included. There's questions about waste. There's questions about virtual jobs. So trust me, we will go through all of those. They will not be lost if we didn't get to them tonight.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say, that we have the chat record, we have everything. Rest assured that we'll get to everything. And thank you so much for those of you that sent us suggestions through emails. We got them all and we'll do our best to address that. Thank you so much. We will see you next week on how to be a great feeding service associates. Thank you so much. It'll be 5:30 Pacific time. So if you're in Alaska, we're 1 hour ahead. Or if you're in Mountain Time, we have different time zones. So thank you so much, all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.